The private jet terminal was eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of engines and the occasional murmur of passengers moving briskly across the polished floor. At the far corner, two black twin girls sat on a plush leather bench, their faces hidden behind trembling hands. Their tears fell freely, streaking down their faces as they clung to each other for dear life. The sight of them, young, helpless, and in despair, would have gone unnoticed in such a busy terminal if not for one thing. A boy, no older than 14, stood just a few feet away from them, watching with wide, confused eyes. He was dressed in worn-out clothes, his shoes scuffed from long journeys and hardships most people his age couldn't imagine. His name was Michael, and unlike the other well-dressed passengers who looked at the twin girls with a mixture of indifference and discomfort, Michael felt something stirred deep inside him. It wasn't just pity or curiosity, it was something stronger. Something that made his heart race and his palms sweat. Something that told him he couldn't just walk away. He hesitated, then moved closer. The girls didn't notice him at first, lost in their own world of sorrow. But when Michael stood directly in front of them, they both looked up, their eyes locking onto his with the kind of intensity only deep pain could create. "Are you all right?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The girls blinked, startled by his sudden appearance. The older of the two, dressed in a faded pink dress, looked away first, embarrassed. But the younger one, with her big eyes brimming with tears, stared at him with an expression Michael would never forget. There was something about her gaze, was as though she could see right through him, as if the weight of the world rested in those innocent eyes. Who are you?" The younger girl stammered, her voice thick with emotion. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "I'm Michael," he replied, his throat tight. "I was just wondering. Why are you two crying? Can I help?" The older girl shook her head and looked down, clearly uncomfortable, but the younger one didn't turn away. Instead, her lip trembled. We don't know what to do," she said, her voice breaking. We were supposed to fly with our parents, but they're gone. Gone." The word hung in the air like a cloud, suffocating everything around them. Michael's heart squeezed, his gut clenching as he took in their words. "Did something happen to them?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, afraid to hear the answer. The twin girls looked at each other, the weight of their shared grief more than they could bear. It was the older one who finally spoke, her voice shaking as she tried to explain. "They died," she said simply, her eyes raw with the kind of pain no child should ever have to experience. "In a crash, on their way back from a business trip. They said they would be back in time for our birthday," but she trailed off, her voice faltering. "They didn't make it." Michael stood still, every word of their story sinking into him like a stone dropped into still water. He could feel the tears in his own eyes threatening to spill, but he quickly wiped them away. These girls didn't need his pity, they needed something else, something he had no idea how to give. He glanced around the terminal, as though seeking help. The wealthy passengers, who could afford to fly in private jets, didn't look like the type who would offer anything but empty words and polite gestures. But then, something caught his eye. Large group of suited figures talking in hushed tones near the security check. They were executives, judging by their attire, and they looked like they could do anything to help these girls. But none of them had approached it. None of them had stepped forward. Michael turned back to the twins, his heart pounding. "You're not alone," he said, a small but determined spark lighting in his chest. "I don't have much, but I'll help. I'll make sure you're not alone." The older girl looked at him in disbelief. What can you possibly do?" Michael felt a twinge of embarrassment. He was just a boy, barely scraping by. He had no money, no resources, no connections. But at that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that there were two girls, alone and stranded in an airport, their world shattered. And if he could offer them anything at all, he had to do it. Before he could say more, an announcement came over the loudspeaker. "Flight 2422 to Miami, final boarding call." The sound echoed throughout the terminal, cutting through the heavy silence that had settled between the three of them. The twins stood up slowly, still unsure, still reeling from the reality that had shattered their lives. But Michael, without hesitation, stepped in front of them. "Come with me," he said. "I'll find a way to get you where you need to go." The younger twin looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and hope. She reached out, grabbing his hand with surprising strength for someone so young. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky but full of gratitude. Michael felt his heart race. But this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from something else. Something that he could barely put into words. He wasn't sure what would happen next. But one thing was clear: his life would never be the same again, and neither would theirs. The terminal was cold as the final call echoed across the polished floors, but none of them moved. Michael stood still, his hand still holding tightly to the younger twin's small trembling one. The older twin, still in shock, couldn't bring herself to say a word, but there was something in Michael's gaze that made her take a hesitant step forward. It was as if, despite the world falling apart around them, there was a sliver of hope, a faint light that flickered just enough to draw them in. He could barely comprehend what had happened in the last few minutes. He, a boy from the street, with nothing but the clothes on his back and the dream of something better, was now standing here with two girls who had just lost everything. Everything they had ever known was gone, and they were left to pick up the pieces. It felt wrong, like a dream or a cruel joke, but Michael had no time for doubts. They needed him, and he wasn't about to let them down. Where do you need to go?" Michael asked, his voice steady, even though inside he was shaking. His stomach churned as he glanced around the terminal, filled with people who looked like they belonged in a different world, rich, powerful, untouchable. And then there was him, just a boy, offering whatever scraps he could to help these two. We were supposed to go to Miami," the older twin said, her voice barely audible. "Our parents, they wanted us to start fresh there. Everything was set up. The house, the school, everything." Her voice cracked, and she had to stop herself before the tears overwhelmed her again. Michael clenched his fists. He didn't know what he could do. He didn't have any money, no ticket, no means to help them get on a plane. But he knew one thing: he wouldn't leave them here. The younger twin, still holding his hand, looked up at him with eyes that were too big for her face. "Can you help us, please?" Her voice was so small, so fragile, as though she was afraid to ask, as though asking might make everything worse. But there was no other choice. She had already lost everything. Michael nodded without a second thought. "I'll figure it out. You're not going through this alone." With a deep breath, Michael turned toward the boarding area, trying to ignore the gnawing fear in his chest. He had no idea what he was doing, no clue how he was going to help them, but there was a fire inside him now, a fire that wouldn't be extinguished until he saw them safe. He could barely believe it himself. He was about to help two girls he didn't know, and he had no plan, no resources, just his will and his heart. The older twin finally spoke, her voice quieter now, resigned. "How are you going to do this?" She didn't mean to sound dismissive, but Michael could tell she was struggling with the same questions. "How is he going to make something out of nothing?" "I'll find a way," Michael said firmly, though his own mind was racing. He had to do something, anything. They couldn't be stuck here. "Trust me, we'll figure this out together." The younger twin pulled on his sleeve, looking up at him with a hopeful expression that broke Michael's heart. "You're our hero," she whispered. The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut. Hero? He was just a boy, just someone who stumbled across two strangers in their darkest moment. But as he looked at the twins, he realized something: it didn't matter if he was a hero or not. What mattered was that they were together, and he would do whatever it took to get them to safety. They walked toward the counter, where a woman with short, neatly styled hair was checking tickets. Michael stepped forward, his heart racing. He had no idea what he was going to say. "Excuse me," he said, his voice suddenly tight with nervousness. "I need 2 tickets to Miami. Can you help us?" The woman looked up, her eyes scanning Michael briefly before shifting to the 2 girls behind him. She gave them a polite but cold smile, the kind of smile that Michael had seen 100 times in places like this. The smile that said she was part of the world that didn't care about people like him. "I'm afraid all flights are full at this hour," the woman said dismissively, turning her attention back to the screen in front of her. "You'll have to come back tomorrow." Michael's stomach twisted with frustration. "But they need to go now," he said urgently, pointing to the girls. It's important." The woman didn't even look up. "There's nothing I can do. Please, move aside." She waved a hand toward the side as if she were dismissing a nuisance. Michael's heart dropped. He could feel his hope slipping away, but he couldn't give up now. He could see the older twin standing back, her arms crossed, trying not to cry again. And the younger twin, her eyes full of quiet pain, was clutching his sleeve with both hands, her small frame shaking with each breath. A voice inside him screamed. He had to do something. He couldn't let them down. "I don't have much," Michael said, his voice shaking slightly as he turned to the woman, "but I'll pay whatever it takes. I'll do anything to get them to Miami. Please, just let us through." The woman raised an eyebrow, her expression finally changing. She looked at Michael as though seeing him for the first time, and for a brief moment, there was something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition, a flash of something almost human. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You don't get it, do you?" she asked softly, glancing at the twins. "You're not just trying to buy a ticket, you're dealing with people's lives. People who have money, power. They can do whatever they want. You can't just waltz in here and demand things." Michael swallowed hard, but he wasn't backing down. "I don't care about money. I just need them to be safe. I'll do anything." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. Then, just when Michael thought he had failed, she sighed. "All right, follow me." The words took a moment to register. Michael's heart leaped, his chest tightening as he followed her. The twins walked behind him, still unsure but now clinging to that fragile hope Michael had given them. As they moved past the check-in counter, Michael felt something shift in the air. It wasn't just the woman's sudden change of heart, it was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as alone as they had thought. Maybe there were still people willing to help, willing to fight for what was right. Maybe Michael wasn't as powerless as he had always believed. As they approached a hidden corner of the terminal, the woman turned to Michael. "This is where the VIP flights are handled," she said, her voice much softer now. "I'm going to make an exception. You'll need to move quickly." Michael's breath caught. The older twin looked at him, eyes wide. The younger one squeezed his hand again, her grip tight with hope. But Michael knew this wasn't over yet. They still had a long way to go. The hidden corner of the terminal was cold and quiet, not like the bustling part they had just left behind. Michael felt his heart race as the woman led them through a narrow hallway, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. It felt like they were in a different world, a place where only a select few could enter. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, and Michael couldn't help but feel out of place. The twins followed behind, their footsteps tentative, unsure of what was coming next. The older twin kept her eyes fixed ahead, her face pale with the weight of everything that had happened. She had stopped crying, but there was a certain emptiness in her expression, as if all the tears had been used up. The younger twin, on the other hand, still clung to Michael's side, her small hand gripping his tightly, her eyes wide and filled with a mix of fear and hope. Michael could feel the weight of her hand against his skin, and he couldn't help but wonder how much she understood of what was going on. Did she know how far out of his league this all was? Did she realize that he was just a boy trying to help her find a way out of a nightmare that he couldn't even comprehend? The woman in front of them didn't say anything as she led them deeper into the hidden area. She moved quickly, her pace steady, and it was clear that she wasn't used to being questioned. Michael wanted to ask her about the plan, about how they were supposed to get on a plane, but he didn't dare interrupt. He had to trust that she knew what she was doing, even if every step they took felt like they were walking into the unknown. They finally arrived at a small door, and the woman knocked softly before opening it without waiting for a response. The room beyond was dimly lit, with sleek, modern furniture and a large desk in the center. Behind the desk sat a man in a sharp suit, his face unreadable as he glanced up from a stack of papers. "Mr. Walker," the woman said, her voice polite but firm, "I've brought them." Mr. Walker didn't respond immediately. He simply studied them, his gaze lingering on the twins before shifting to Michael. His eyes were cold, calculating, as if trying to measure something intangible. Finally, he spoke, his voice smooth and practiced. "You're here to help them?" he asked, his tone more of a statement than a question. Michael nodded, though the words felt stuck in his throat. He had no idea what he was walking into, no idea what Mr. Walker could do, or if he could even help. But there was no turning back now. He had to see this through. The man behind the desk gave a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "It's a noble gesture, boy," he said, his voice laced with something Michael couldn't quite place. "But do you really know what you're asking for?" Michael's stomach twisted. The words didn't sit well with him. What was that supposed to mean? Was this some kind of test, some trick to see if he would back down? "I'm doing what I can," Michael said, his voice steady despite the nerves gnawing at him. "I'm just trying to help." Mr. Walker's smile faded, replaced by something colder, more calculated. "Helping is a tricky thing. you see, especially when people like us are involved. You think you're just getting them on a plane, but it's not that simple. There are rules, systems, connections. You're dealing with people who don't like to be disturbed. The air in the room grew heavier, the tension mounting as Michael tried to figure out what Mr. Walker was getting at. His mind raced, but before he could speak, the woman who had led them here spoke again, her voice calm yet authoritative. "Mr. Walker, they're not here to cause trouble. They just need a way to get to Miami." He looked at her, then back at the twins, and Michael felt a chill run through him. The man's eyes were like ice, cold and calculating, and for a moment, Michael wondered if they had made a mistake in trusting him. But then, something shifted in Mr. Walker's gaze, something like curiosity. "Fine," Mr. Walker said after a long pause. "We'll do it your way, but I'm not doing this for free." Michael's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected it to be free, but he didn't have much. He barely had enough to get by, let alone pay for something like this. His mind raced as he looked at the twins, both of them still standing there, unsure of what was happening. They didn't understand any of this. They didn't know that they were at the mercy of a man whose power stretched far beyond what Michael could imagine. The younger twin squeezed Michael's hand, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. She didn't know what was going on either. She only knew that Michael had promised to help them, and he couldn't break that promise. I don't have much," Michael said, his voice shaking now, "but I'll do whatever I can. Just, please, get them on a plane. They don't have anyone else." The man behind the desk leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. "Everyone has a price, Michael, even you. If you want something this big, you're going to have to pay, and you'll need more than just money. You'll need to prove you can handle the consequences." Michael's stomach twisted with unease. Consequences? What did that even mean? What kind of world had he walked into? The woman who had been silent until now spoke again, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "I'll handle the details, Mr. Walker. Just make sure they get on that plane." Mr. Walker nodded, then turned to Michael, his expression unreadable. "You'll owe me for this, boy. Remember that." The words hung in the air like a threat, but Michael didn't have time to dwell on them. He had to focus on the twins. They were his responsibility now, and he couldn't let them down, not when they were so close to safety. As Mr. Walker turned away, the woman moved toward the door, gesturing for Michael and the twins to follow. They stepped out of the room, leaving behind the cold eyes of Mr. Walker and the weight of his words. But as they walked down the hallway, Michael could feel something heavy hanging over them. They weren't out of danger yet. The woman led them back to the main terminal, where the atmosphere was still just as cold and sterile. She paused before a small, inconspicuous door at the far end, turning to look at them one last time. "You'll be fine," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Just get on the plane. Everything else will fall into place." Michael didn't know if he could trust her words, but he didn't have much choice. He had promised to help, and he was going to see it through. He turned to the twins, both of them still so young, so fragile, yet so strong in their own way. They had been through so much already, and now they had to face one more challenge. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. It wasn't over yet. The real test was just beginning. The world outside the terminal seemed 1,000 miles away as they moved toward the unmarked door. Michael's heart beat like a drum in his chest, and every step felt heavier than the last. The twins walked beside him, their faces pale and unsure, caught between the need for safety and the fear of what was to come. He glanced at them, the older twin with her determined but tired eyes, and the younger one who held on to him like her life depended on it. The younger twin's fingers were wrapped tightly around his hand, pulling him forward as if she could feel what he was feeling. They reached the door, the woman leading them now more like a guide than someone who had just crossed a line in Michael's mind. She didn't look back to check if they were following, didn't wait to see if they were ready. She simply pushed the door open and stepped through. Michael hesitated for just a second, but the twins were already moving, the older one pushing ahead and the younger one tugging at his sleeve. They were inside a dimly lit corridor, lined with doors that led to parts of the airport Michael had never even imagined. There were no signs, no security checkpoints, just plain white walls and the faint smell of something sterile, almost clinical. The air was cool, too cool, and Michael could feel the shift in atmosphere, the sense that this was a place where rules were bent and deals were made under the table. The woman walked ahead, still quiet but purposeful. Michael felt the need to ask questions, to demand some sort of explanation, but he held his tongue. He didn't want to stop them now, not when they were so close to getting the twins on a plane to Miami. He looked down at the younger twin again. Her face was a mixture of confusion and hope, as if she didn't fully understand what was happening, but trusted him enough to follow his lead. He had to keep that trust intact, and had to make sure he didn't falter. "Where are we going?" the older twin finally asked, her voice low but sharp, like she was trying to keep control over everything that was slipping away from her. "What's going to happen now?" Michael turned to her, giving a small, reassuring smile, even though he didn't have any answers. "We're going to get you out of here. That's all I know." The older twin frowned but nodded, her eyes betraying her unease. They continued walking in silence for a few more minutes, each step taking them deeper into the maze of corridors. Finally, the woman stopped in front of another door, this one slightly more ornate than the others. The woman knocked once and then opened the door without waiting for a response. The room beyond was stark but functional. A desk sat against the far wall, cluttered with papers, a laptop, and a phone that seemed far too expensive for a place like this. The man behind the desk didn't look up at first, absorbed in whatever was on his screen, but when he heard the door click open, he paused, a flicker of recognition flashing across his face before he wiped it away. "Mr. Walker said, you're bringing them," the man said, his voice clipped and professional, though it was clear he wasn't too thrilled about it. Michael felt a surge of frustration. Every step they had taken so far had been on the edge of a cliff, each moment making him feel more like a stranger in a world that didn't belong to him. He had no business here, no right to be standing in a room like this, but the twins needed him. "Yes," Michael said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're here, we just need the tickets, and we'll go. Please." The man glanced at the twins and then back to Michael, sizing him up with a cool, detached gaze. "You don't understand, do you? This is more than just a plane ticket. The things come with a cost, kid. You're not just buying a seat on a flight. You're buying your way into a world you don't even know exists. You think this is going to be easy?" Michael clenched his jaw, anger bubbling up inside him. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew nothing about this was going to be simple, but he wasn't going to back down. Not now, not when the twins were depending on him. "I don't care what it costs," Michael said through gritted teeth. "I'll do whatever it takes. Just let us go." The man behind the desk stared at him for a long moment, his eyes cold and calculating. Michael could almost see the wheels turning in the man's mind, weighing his options, considering whether Michael was worth the trouble. Finally, the man gave a small nod. "Fine," he said. "We'll arrange it." Michael's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The twins looked at him, their faces mixed with surprise and confusion. They didn't understand what had just happened, and didn't know the depth of the situation, but they trusted him, and that was enough for now. The man behind the desk stood up and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a small envelope. He slid it across the desk to Michael. "Inside, you'll find everything you need," he said, his tone dismissive. "Your flight details, your seat assignments, everything. Take it and go." Michael reached for the envelope, his fingers trembling as he grabbed it. For a brief moment, the reality of it all hit him. He was holding something that could change everything for the twins. He was holding their chance at a new life, a new beginning. It was more than just a piece of paper, was their future, and he was the one who had gotten them here. He looked at the twins, their faces brightening at the sight of the envelope. The older twin reached for it first, her eyes wide with disbelief. She opened it carefully, as though afraid it might vanish if she touched it too quickly. "There it is," the woman said, stepping forward. "Now, get out of here before it's too late." Michael nodded quickly, his heart still pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure how much time they had left, but he wasn't going to waste any more of it. He turned to the twins, smiling with relief, though it was a smile tinged with exhaustion. "Let's go," he said. "We're almost there." The younger twin smiled back at him, a spark of hope finally igniting in her eyes. She squeezed his hand again, tighter this time, as if she couldn't quite believe that things were finally falling into place. They left the room, stepping back into the sterile hallways that now felt less like a maze and more like a pathway, leading them to safety. The woman followed them at a distance, but Michael could feel her presence like a shadow, watching them as they moved toward the terminal. The final leg of the journey was in sight, and they were almost free. The twins were silent now, the weight of everything that had happened settling on them. Michael didn't know what they were thinking, but he could feel the shift in the air, the quiet understanding that this moment, this small victory, was just the beginning of something far bigger than any of them could imagine. They reached the door to the main terminal, and Michael pushed it open, stepping out into the hustle and bustle of the airport. But this time, it felt different. This time, it felt like they were walking toward something better, something new. They were finally going to Miami, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Michael believed it was going to be okay. The terminal was as chaotic as ever, but somehow felt distant now. Michael could hear the announcements, the hustle of people rushing by, the clink of luggage wheels on the smooth floor. But it all felt like background noise as he moved through the crowd, the twins by his side. The heaviness that had been in the air earlier had lifted. It was a strange feeling, the kind of moment that seemed unreal, as though everything had shifted at once. They stood in front of the check-in counter, the place where all of this started. The woman who had helped them earlier was standing to the side, watching quietly as the clerk typed away at the computer. Michael's heart was pounding. He knew they were so close now, but something inside him told him they weren't out of danger. Yet, this wasn't just a simple task anymore. There was too much at stake, too many things that could go wrong. The older twin was now quiet, her arms crossed as she glanced around nervously. She hadn't said much since the envelope had been handed to them, her expression unreadable. The younger twin, however, was clinging to Michael's side, her fingers curled tightly around his sleeve. She was still scared, but she had hope now. She believed they were going to make it. "I can't believe this is really happening," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise of the terminal. Michael looked down at her and smiled softly. He hadn't realized how much of the burden had fallen on him until now. She was right. They were here, just a few steps away from being free. But the reality of it all was beginning to settle in. How had he gotten here? What had driven him to risk everything for two strangers he had just met? But he didn't have time to think about it. They were almost there. He couldn't let anything derail their escape now. The clerk handed over the boarding passes, and Michael felt a surge of relief flood through him. They had made it this far. It was real now. The twins had their tickets, and they were going to get on that plane. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had done it. Against all odds, he had helped them when no one else had. The woman who had helped them earlier stepped forward, her expression still unreadable. "They're ready. Make sure they get through security without any issues," she said, her voice calm but carrying an unspoken weight. Michael nodded, the knot in his stomach tightening again. He wasn't sure why, but something about her made him uneasy. There was a certain finality to her words, like she was saying goodbye without actually saying it. "We'll be fine," Michael said, his voice steady but not as confident as he wanted it to be. He turned to the twins, the older one still quiet but the younger one giving him a small smile. "Thanks to you," she said softly. I think everything's going to be okay now." Michael smiled back, the words hitting him harder than he expected. It wasn't just the relief he felt at getting them on the plane. It was the weight of responsibility that had shifted. From him to them, they were no longer alone in this world. He had done his part, and now it was their turn to start over, to find a life for themselves. He had given them a chance, and they had taken it. They moved toward the security checkpoint, and as they walked, Michael felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The twins still had a future to build, and he didn't know what it would look like for them, but he was certain it would be better than what they had left behind. They were going to have a new life, a chance to heal from the pain that had haunted them as they stood in line for security. The older twin spoke for the first time in what felt like hours. "How did you do it?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "How did you find a way when there was no way?" Michael paused, unsure of how to answer. How did he explain the feeling inside him, the drive that had pushed him to act without knowing what would happen next? How could he explain that he had felt, deep down, that he couldn't let them down, that he couldn't let them stay lost, alone, without a future? "I didn't know what I was doing," Michael admitted, his voice quiet. "I just knew I had to help. I couldn't walk away." She nodded, as if she understood, but Michael could tell she was still processing everything. It was hard to grasp the enormity of what had just happened. Just a few hours ago, they were strangers, lost and alone in a world that didn't care. Now, They were heading to Miami, to a new life. It was a small miracle in a sea of uncertainty. The security process went smoothly, too smoothly, and Michael found himself waiting with bated breath as the twins passed through the checkpoint. He was still on edge, still waiting for something to go wrong. It didn't make sense to feel this way when they were so close to freedom, but it was impossible to shake the feeling that something was off, that they hadn't truly made it yet. As the twins stepped through the scanner, the older twin turned to look at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also with something deeper, something Michael couldn't quite place. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do this." Michael smiled, trying to hide the emotions that were rising in his chest. "You don't need to thank me. Just go. Live your life." With that, they made their way toward the gate, Michael following them just a few steps behind. He watched as the twins settled into their seats, their faces still full of uncertainty, but with a hint of something more, hope. As they waited for the flight to take off, Michael felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He had done everything he could. He had gotten them to safety. He had kept his promise. The flight was called, and the twins stood, their bags slung over their shoulders. As they moved toward the jet bridge, Michael stayed where he was, watching them go. He could feel the weight of everything lifting from his shoulders, but he couldn't bring himself to leave just yet. He had made it this far, and now he had to watch them disappear into the future they deserved. The younger twin looked back at him just before they entered the jet bridge, her eyes wide, as though she wanted to say something, but she didn't. She just smiled, a small but genuine smile that spoke volumes. And then they were gone. Michael stood there for a moment, his heart still racing, unsure of what to do next. But then he realized something. It didn't matter. He had done what he needed to do. The twins were safe. That was all that mattered. He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps light, his heart finally at peace. The night was cold as Michael stepped out into the parking lot, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the empty space. The airport had grown quiet now, most of the flights already taken off, and the passengers had long since vanished into the city or headed home. Michael, however, stood there for a long moment, staring at the dark sky above, unsure of what to do next. He had kept his promise. He had made sure the twins were on their flight. He had done everything he could to give them a chance at a new life, and now they were on their way to Miami, to somewhere that wasn't defined by pain and loss. But as he stood there, alone in the vast parking lot, something inside him felt hollow, as if a piece of him had been left behind with them. The night air was biting, sharp enough to make him shiver. His jacket, old and worn, didn't provide much warmth, but it was all he had. He tugged it tighter around his shoulders and started walking toward the bus stop at the edge of the lot. There was no car waiting for him, no place he could call home. His life was a series of small, empty moments, drifting from one place to the next, always looking for something he couldn't quite name. He didn't want to think about it. He didn't want to dwell on the emptiness that seemed to follow him everywhere. The twins had their chance now. They had a future ahead of them. That was enough. It had to be. The bus stop was deserted when he arrived, the light flickering above casting a harsh glow over the cracked pavement. Michael sat on the cold metal bench, pulling his jacket tighter around him and watching the streetlights blink out one by one as the city began to sleep. It felt surreal, the sense of calm that had settled over him now that the twins were safe. The past few days had been a whirlwind of uncertainty and fear, but now that it was over, Michael could finally breathe. He had done it. They had made it. But just as he was beginning to think he could rest, the sound of footsteps broke through the quiet of the night. Michael looked up, surprised to see a figure approaching, their silhouette barely visible in the dim light. "Michael," the voice called, hesitant but familiar. He froze. It wasn't just any voice. It was hers, the woman who had helped them, the one who had led them through the maze of corridors and back rooms, the one who had made it all possible. He hadn't expected to see her again. He had assumed that after the twins boarded the plane, he would never hear from her or anyone connected to that strange, shadowy world. "Yeah?" he asked, standing up as she came closer. The woman smiled faintly, her expression unreadable. She was dressed in the same dark coat as before, her posture as composed as ever. But there was something different about her now. She seemed almost softer, less guarded, like the weight of whatever business she had been involved in had lifted for a moment. "He did well," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of something else beneath the surface. "You kept your promise." Michael nodded, unsure of what to say. He had done what he thought was right. He didn't expect any accolades or praise. All he wanted was to see the twins safe, to give them something they had never had, a future. But her words struck him in a way he hadn't anticipated. "You know," she continued, taking a step closer, "not many people would have done what you did. You could have walked away, let someone else handle it, but you didn't. That's not something you see every day." Michael looked down, his hands shoved deep into his pockets as he shuffled his feet. He wasn't sure how to respond. He hadn't done it for recognition. He hadn't done it to be noticed. He had done it because the twins needed him, because he couldn't stand the thought of them being abandoned in a place like that. "I just did what felt right," he muttered, feeling uncomfortable under her gaze. The woman studied him for a moment, her eyes sharp yet soft at the same time. "You've got more heart than most," she said. "That's what gets people in trouble. You know, it's easy to want to help others, but sometimes it takes more than just that. Sometimes it's about knowing when to walk away." Michael looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time. There was something in her eyes, something that made him feel like she was speaking from experience. But before he could ask her what she meant, she turned away, her hand brushing the hem of her coat as she prepared to leave. "Where are you going?" Michael asked, before he could stop himself. The woman paused, glancing over her shoulder at him. For a brief moment, there was something like hesitation in her eyes, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same impenetrable calm. "I have business to attend to," she said simply, as if that explained everything. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the night. Michael stood there, rooted to the spot, watching her figure fade into the shadows. He didn't understand why she had come to see him, why she had said what she said, but in that moment, he knew that she was right. There was more to helping people than just doing what felt right. There were consequences, choices that had to be made, and sometimes those choices were more than anyone could handle. He shook his head, pushing those thoughts aside. He couldn't think about that right now. Not when the twins were safe, not when he had done what he set out to do. They were on their way to a better life, and he had been the one to get them there. That was enough. The bus arrived a few minutes later, the headlights casting long shadows as it pulled up to the curb. Michael stepped on, paying the fare and sitting by the window, his eyes focused on the street outside. He didn't know where he was going or what came next. He didn't know if he would ever see the twins again or if their paths would cross in the future. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. The city passed by in a blur as the bus made its way through the streets. Michael stared out the window, watching the lights flicker and fade into the distance. He had done something important today, something that would change the course of their lives forever. And in the end, that was all that mattered. When the bus reached his stop, Michael stepped off into the quiet night, the weight of the world finally beginning to lift. For once, he wasn't looking over his shoulder, wondering what would happen next. He wasn't worried about what tomorrow would bring. He had done his part, and now it was time to let go. He walked down the empty street, the stars overhead casting a faint glow on the pavement. For the first time in a long time, Michael felt like he was heading in the right direction. It didn't matter where he was going, just that he had done something good, and sometimes that was enough. The end.